In 260 AD, the Roman Emperor Valerian was captured alive by Shapur I, king of kings of the Sasanian Empire. Not killed in battle, not removed by conspiracy in Rome, not lost as a name in some confused frontier report, captured, taken into Persian power as a living prize, a diplomatic weapon, and an accusation against Rome's entire idea of itself. For centuries, Rome had taught the Mediterranean world to believe in a particular order of reality. That Roman law could outlast kings, that Roman arms could discipline geography, that defeat could be absorbed and converted into vengeance, and that the emperor stood at the center of civilization as the visible point where military command, divine favor, senatorial memory, frontier security, and imperial destiny converged. Yet in 260 AD on the eastern frontier, that mythology was compressed into one impossible fact. The man who embodied Rome's universal authority was alive in enemy hands, and his survival became the proof of Roman defeat. This was not merely a military disaster. It was an ideological rupture. Rome did not present itself as one great power among others. Rome claimed to be the frame in which other powers were judged. Its emperor was more than a general with purple cloth and armed guards. He was the living symbol of order, victory, law, pay, prestige, and continuity. To capture such a man was to seize a political argument in human form. Shapur understood that. The Sasanian court understood that. And Rome, for a moment, had no language strong enough to contain the humiliation. The story that follows is therefore not an anecdote about one unlucky ruler. It is an investigation into power under extreme pressure. I am Professor Adrian Lockwell, and here in the Archives of Humanity, the archive opens not to admire ruins from a distance, but to examine the machinery hidden inside catastrophe. Prestige, fear, logistics, propaganda, disease, ambition, and denial. At the center stands Valerian, emperor of the mid-3rd century AD, a ruler who inherited not the balanced empire of Augustus, but a Roman world strained by military coups, frontier invasions, monetary debasement, epidemic disease, and armies whose loyalty had become both the foundation and the terror of imperial rule. Opposite him stands Shapur I, ruler of a reborn Persian empire, heir to the Sasanian Revolution, a monarch who did not accept Rome as the final authority of history, but challenged it as a rival claimant to universal dominion. The arenas are vast. The Roman Senate, still clothed in the dignity of an older republic. The eastern frontier, where prestige became geography and every road could become a trap. Sasanian royal propaganda, carved into stone at places like Nakshi Rostam, one of the great non-Roman witnesses to the catastrophe. Plague-stricken armies, whose suffering may have narrowed Roman choices before the decisive collision even began. And above all, the politics of imperial legitimacy. That brutal theater in which rulers must appear invincible precisely when their systems are beginning to bleed beneath the armor. Was Valerian's capture a freak disaster? The rare lightning strike that humiliates even a powerful state? Was it a Persian masterstroke? A deliberate act of strategic theater by Shapur, who understood that a captive emperor could do more damage to Rome than 1,000 dead soldiers? Or was it something deeper? The visible symptom of an empire stretched across too many frontiers, pressured by too many crises, and intoxicated by prestige until command and exposure became dangerously difficult to distinguish? Before Edessa can be understood, the impossible image must be restored to its full force. A Roman emperor alive in Persian captivity. For Rome, such a thing was not merely disastrous. It should have been unthinkable. The investigation begins there, with the ancient assumption that victory had made Roman power sacred, and with the darker question of whether prestige can blind a state to reality. The path to Edessa did not begin with a single bad campaign. It began with an empire whose strength had become dangerously expensive to maintain. Rome in the mid-3rd century AD was not a corpse waiting for burial. That familiar image is too simple and too comforting. Rome still commanded cities, roads, tax systems, arsenals, fleets, granaries, engineers, governors, and armies hardened by centuries of war. It remained a superpower. But it was a superpower whose internal machinery was beginning to grind against itself. Modern historians such as David S. Potter and Pat Southern describe this period not as one clean collapse, but as a compound emergency, the crisis of the 3rd century. After the Severan dynasty, the imperial office lost the aura of stable succession. In 235 AD, Alexander Severus was murdered by his own troops, and that assassination announced a brutal new political law. Emperors would no longer merely inherit power. They would have to survive the armies that gave it to them. The purple became a military contract written in blood. Across the map, pressure arrived from every direction. On the Rhine, Germanic confederations tested Roman defenses. Along the Danube, Gothic and other groups pressed against the frontier. In the east, Rome faced not the older Parthian order, but the newly aggressive Sasanian Empire. In the Balkans, in North Africa, in Syria, and within the provinces themselves, rebellion and emergency multiplied. Rome's problem was not that it had no power. Rome's problem was that power had to be everywhere at once. This created the cruel geography of legitimacy. An emperor absent from one frontier risked being called negligent. An emperor present on another frontier risked leaving space for a rival. Every army watched the movements of the court. Every commander knew that distance could become opportunity. Every province learned to measure imperial authority not by theory, but by speed, how fast troops arrived, how fast pay was distributed, how fast victory could be displayed. In this world, geography became politics. The army was still Rome's shield, but it had also become Rome's executioner. Soldiers protected the empire from invasion, yet they could elevate a general 1 month and murder an emperor the next. They expected donatives at accession, regular pay, promotion, prestige, and the visible presence of command. Loyalty had become a political economy. It was purchased, renewed, and constantly renegotiated. The coinage itself revealed the strain. Debasement was not merely a technical detail for specialists in ancient money. It was a confession stamped in metal. By reducing precious content, the state could issue more currency, pay more soldiers, and buy time. But every weakened coin carried a deeper message. Trust was being converted into emergency spending. The empire was funding survival by consuming confidence. Then disease entered the calculation. The so-called plague of Cyprian, active in the mid-3rd century AD, cannot be diagnosed with certainty from ancient testimony. But its strategic effect is clear. Epidemic disease reduced manpower, disrupted taxation, burdened cities, weakened recruitment, slowed movement, and made every military decision more costly before the enemy even appeared. Plague did not need to destroy Rome in order to change Rome. It only needed to narrow the empire's choices. So Rome was not simply weak. It was overstretched strength, a massive crisis management organism still formidable, but forced into reflexes that made each crisis feed the next. March to the Danube and Persia could move. Ride east and the Rhine could breed a usurper. Remain near the center, and the frontiers might read caution as abandonment. The imperial office had become a machine that demanded movement, victory, money, and spectacle, then punished hesitation as treason. This was the world that produced Valerian. Not a fool wandering blindly toward disaster, but an emperor trapped inside a system where visible action was the price of political survival. His presence could rally armies and reassure provinces, but it also gathered Roman prestige into one vulnerable body. And beyond the eastern horizon, a rival empire was beginning to recognize that Rome's greatest danger was not the absence of strength, but the exhaustion created by having too much to defend. Across the Euphrates, Rome did not face a loose frontier nuisance waiting to be punished. It faced a reborn imperial machine. For centuries, Rome's principal eastern rival had been the Parthian Ars Acid order, formidable, aristocratic, and resilient, yet often divided by noble factions and dynastic tensions. Roman commanders had learned to work inside those fractures. They could bargain with one claimant against another, exploit court rivalries, and treat the East as a dangerous theater of recurring campaigns rather than a single, centralized ideological challenge. That older calculation began to fail in the early 3rd century AD, when Touraj I rose from Persis, defeated the Ars Acid king Artabanus IV, and founded the Sasanian dynasty. This was not merely a palace coup with new names on old coins. It was a restoration project armed with cavalry, theology, administration, and historical memory. Artaxerxes claimed more than kingship, he claimed renewal. The Sasanian state presented itself as the guardian of Iranian order, the heir to ancient royal grandeur, and the instrument of divine favor. In the language of empires, such claims were never ornamental. They told armies why they marched, elites why they obeyed, and enemies why defeat could be framed as destiny. Rome called itself eternal. Persia called its ruler king of kings. Rome placed universal order beneath the emperor. The Sasanian monarchy answered with its own universal horizon, rooted in Iranian kingship, Zoroastrian legitimacy, and control over lands that connected the Mediterranean world to the wealth and routes of Asia. Two neighboring states could negotiate boundaries. Two universal empires struggled to tolerate one another's mythology. Artaxerxes built a state ready for confrontation. Shapur I inherited that engine, sharpened it, and enlarged its ambition. The Sasanian objective was not simply to raid Roman land and disappear beyond the horizon. The prizes were structural. Mesopotamia, the ancient contested basin between the Tigris and Euphrates. Armenia, the highland hinge whose allegiance could open invasion corridors or seal them shut, caravan routes, tax flows, fortified cities, and prestige centers whose possession announced which monarchy commanded the frontier's imagination. Modern scholars such as Touraj Daryaee and the frontier studies associated with Michael Dodgen and Samuel Liu make the essential point clear. Sasanian Iran was not a barbarian opposite of Rome. It was a disciplined counter-empire, administrative, ideological, militarized, and fully capable of reading Roman exhaustion as opportunity. The Eastern map, then, was not empty space beyond civilization. It was a crowded strategic machine. Mesopotamia offered roads, rivers, cities, and traps. Syria gave Rome wealth, manpower, and prestige. Armenia sat above the contest like a lever. The Euphrates was not just a river. It was a corridor, a barrier, and a political threshold. Nisibis guarded approaches into northern Mesopotamia. Carrie carried a memory older than the 3rd century crisis. In 53 BC, Crassus and his legions had been shattered by Parthian arms, proving that Roman arrogance could be consumed by Eastern strategy. Edessa stood near that haunted geography, not as a poetic setting, but as a node of power whose name would become catastrophic in 260 AD. Farther west, Antioch was the nerve center of Roman Syria. Administrative base, logistical hub, prestige metropolis, and symbol of Rome's eastern confidence. To threaten Antioch was to attack not merely territory, but Roman self-belief. Shapur understood that power had to be seen. His royal inscription, the residential Gesti Divi Saporis at Nakshi Rostam, would later present victories over Roman emperors as a sequence of world historical triumphs. Gordian, Philip, Valerian. The inscription is not a neutral campaign diary. It is royal self-presentation carved into stone. Yet that is precisely why it matters. Propaganda reveals the architecture of ambition. Shapur wanted victory converted into memory, memory converted into hierarchy, and hierarchy converted into a vision of the world. Persia above Rome, king of kings above emperor. And here the distinction between old trauma and new disaster becomes decisive. Carrie had humiliated Rome, but Crassus was a commander who failed. In 260 AD, the man who would fall into Persian hands was Valerian Augustus, the living embodiment of Roman legitimacy in the East. Before that impossible image could become history, imperial mythology had to descend into the hard mechanics of the frontier. Roads, garrisons, scouts, spies, local alliances, supply depots, river crossings, and decisions made under pressure. The next move on the chessboard was geography itself. Sasanian ambition did not advance across empty space. It moved through one of the most dangerous political landscapes in the ancient world. The Roman-Persian frontier, a zone less like a border than a living machine, layered with cities, roads, client rulers, river crossings, desert routes, spies, merchants, and old imperial wounds. Any ruler who treated it as a line on a map had already misunderstood the battlefield. The eastern frontier must be understood in layers. First came the great corridors: Syria, northern Mesopotamia, Armenia, and the Euphrates route. Then came the fortified nodes: Antioch, Nisibis, Carrhae, and Edessa. Beneath them lay the softer tissues of power: local aristocrats, tribal alliances, caravan networks, deserters, interpreters, scouts, religious communities, and families whose loyalties could bend with fear, profit, or survival. This was not a modern border with fixed sovereignty and neat checkpoints. It was a centuries-old contest in which Rome and Iranian powers had raided, negotiated, fortified, traded, bribed, and married their way into influence. That is why the eastern frontier resisted simple possession. Rome might hold a city while Persia dominated the road beyond it. Persia might claim prestige over a region while Roman gold kept local rulers obedient. Armenia might lean toward one court while its nobles whispered to the other. A treaty could redraw authority. A succession crisis could dissolve it. A fortress commander's discipline, a governor's ambition, a caravan's rumor, or the timing of a campaign season could change the balance. Frontier studies, including the material gathered by Dodgen and Liu, make clear that this was a contested system, not a static wall. Armenia was the great hinge. Whoever influenced Armenia could threaten the other empire's flank, project legitimacy into the Caucasus, and control approaches linking Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Iran. To Rome, Armenia was a buffer protecting the eastern provinces. To Persia, it was both a doorway and a symbol, proof that the King of Kings could pull ancient Iranian spheres of influence back into his orbit. The struggle over Armenia was therefore never merely local. It was diplomacy with a dagger inside it. Farther south, the fortress cities of northern Mesopotamia formed the hard nodes of Roman control. Nisibis guarded routes, supplies, and movement. Carrhae carried an older Roman trauma in its name: the memory of 53 BC, when Crassus and his legions were destroyed by Parthian arms. Edessa belonged to this same strategic world. It was not merely a place near which disaster would occur. It was part of the mechanism that made disaster possible. These cities were locks on the imperial door. But locks require garrisons, provisions, intelligence, money, and time. And then there was Antioch. Antioch was more than a rich and famous metropolis. It was one of the great operating bases of Roman Syria, a center where armies could gather, supplies could be organized, and imperial prestige could be staged before the Eastern world. For Shapur, to menace Antioch was to strike both a nerve center and a symbol. For Rome, to lose Antioch was not only to lose ground. It was to watch the myth of uncontested Eastern authority crack in public. Campaigning in this world demanded more than courage. It required grain, animals, engineers, siege equipment, guides, scouts, physicians, translators, and political collaborators. A Roman army advancing east was a moving city, and a moving city could starve, sicken, stall, or go blind. Disease did not need to annihilate a force to cripple its strategy. Bad intelligence did not need to be total to be fatal. Local cooperation did not need to fail everywhere. It only had to fail at the wrong crossing, on the wrong road, in the wrong week. This was the brutal arithmetic of imperial campaigning. The larger the army, the greater the promise of victory, and the greater the appetite that could consume the campaign from within. The presence of an emperor magnified everything. His arrival could inspire soldiers, reassure allies, intimidate wavering cities, and proclaim that Rome had come in person. But it also concentrated political risk into one body. If the emperor succeeded, legitimacy blazed. If he failed, the entire imperial order appeared to fail with him. Valerian, then, was not moving toward a single battlefield. He was entering a geography trained by centuries of rivalry to punish overconfidence. Roads pulled armies forward. Cities demanded rescue. Prestige forbade retreat. Information traveled faster than certainty. Within that machine, two rulers would soon act under pressure. An aging Roman emperor carrying the expectations of a wounded superpower, and a Persian king who understood that geography, properly read, could become strategy. The eastern frontier did not merely demand an army. It demanded an emperor. That was the cruel arithmetic of the mid-3rd century AD. Rome still possessed generals, governors, fortified cities, treasuries, roads, and the habit of command. But its political culture had become dangerously dependent on visible imperial presence. A frontier army did not want distant reassurance from the palace. It wanted pay, donatives, attention, and proof that the man claiming dominion over the Roman world had not abandoned its most threatened edge. Into this machinery stepped Valerian. Elevated in 253 AD, Valerian was not a reckless soldier of fortune hurled upward by a camp mutiny. He was an older senator, a figure of aristocratic pedigree, and that mattered. In an age when emperors could rise and fall with terrifying speed, his age and rank offered the illusion, and perhaps the substance, of continuity. Later Roman summaries, including Eutropius, preserve his reign with the compressed severity typical of crisis history. Emperors raised, armies dispatched, disasters recorded almost like legal judgments. Yet behind that brevity stood a strategic calculation. Valerian embodied traditional legitimacy at a moment when the imperial purple had become perilously close to a military trophy passed from army to army. His son Gallienus became co-emperor, and this decision reveals the harsh logic of the age. Rome did not divide authority because it had forgotten the dream of unity. It divided authority because unity had become too heavy for one human body to carry. Persia pressed from the east. Germanic forces threatened the Rhine and Danube. The Balkans required constant military vigilance. Rebellions could ignite wherever an army believed itself neglected. Coinage strained beneath the cost of purchasing loyalty. Plague eroded manpower, confidence, and administrative reach. The imperial office was no longer simply a throne. It was a command post surrounded by fires. Modern historians such as David S. Potter and Pat Southern have emphasized that the 3rd century empire was not merely collapsing into helplessness. It was improvising under extreme violence. Collegial rule, father and son, east and west, was a rational response to an almost impossible strategic environment. Valerian would confront the Sasanian danger. Gallienus would carry the burden of the western and central fronts, where the Rhine, the Danube, and ambitious rivals formed their own theater of survival. But strategy always casts a shadow. Divided command could multiply attention, but it could also divide legitimacy. Two emperors meant two courts, two military audiences, two zones of expectation, and two places where victory could create devotion, while failure could invite betrayal. This was the hidden danger beneath the administrative solution. In Rome's older imperial mythology, the emperor embodied the whole world of Roman power. In 3rd century reality, the emperor had to be everywhere. Because he could not be everywhere, the empire began producing substitutes. Commanders became local saviors. Local saviors became political alternatives. Provinces under pressure learned to ask a brutal question. Not who ruled by title, but who could defend in fact. The army was the decisive audience. It guarded emperors, elevated emperors, judged emperors, and when disappointed, abandoned or murdered emperors. Soldiers expected victory because victory promised security. They expected money because loyalty had become a political economy. They expected presence because absence could be read as contempt. The emperor, therefore, was not free in the majestic sense Roman ideology proclaimed. He was hostage to the military system that made him sovereign. Valerian's movement eastward must not be reduced to the folly of an old man walking blindly into a Persian snare. It was the decision of a ruler trapped by the logic of the office. If he ignored the east, Shapur's advances could make Rome appear weak before Syria, Mesopotamia, and Armenia. If he sent only subordinates, their victories might make them dangerous, while their defeats would still stain the emperor. If he delayed, rivals could call him paralyzed. If he advanced, he carried Rome's sacred prestige into a frontier where disease, supply, intelligence, and Persian maneuver could transform imperial presence into imperial vulnerability. Gallienus, meanwhile, inherited the other half of the crisis. His later struggle against Postumus and the breakaway Gallic Empire would show how quickly emergency defense could harden into alternative sovereignty. That future fracture was already latent in the arrangement. Rome had adopted a practical solution that quietly confessed a terrifying fact. The center could no longer personally master the circumference. Here lies the tragedy before Edessa. Valerian's eastern campaign was not born from simple blindness. It was born from necessity, prestige, military expectation, and the political terror of appearing absent from a decisive frontier. Powerful rulers often make catastrophic choices not because the danger is invisible, but because every safer alternative has already become dangerous. And across that frontier stood Shapur I, studying not merely Roman armies, but Roman compulsions. The need for emperors to appear, to answer insult with motion, and to convert prestige into action. Persia's king had inherited a rival empire. He now faced a Roman system whose very method of survival could be turned against it. Across the eastern frontier, Rome faced a monarch who did not think of conquest as a sequence of battles. Shapur I understood war as statecraft and statecraft as spectacle. He wanted victory to explain the world. He had inherited the throne from Ardashir I, the founder of the Sasanian dynasty, who had shattered the old Parthian Ars-Acid order and built a more centralized Iranian empire in its place. This was not a loose frontier monarchy waiting at the edge of Rome's map. It was a counter-empire, armed with memory, religion, aristocratic power, and the immense title King of Kings. Shapur's succession therefore carried a dangerous obligation. He had to prove that the empire had not weakened when authority passed from father to son. For Shapur, Rome was not merely an enemy. Rome was the necessary rival against which Sasanian kingship could define itself. Mesopotamian cities, Armenian allegiance, Syrian roads, and the corridors leading toward Antioch were not isolated prizes. They were instruments in a larger argument. Every fortress pressured, every Roman army embarrassed, every settlement imposed could be translated into one claim. The King of Kings could compel the empire that claimed to command civilization. That argument had begun before Valerian entered the story. In the early 240s AD, the young Emperor Gordian III marched east with the confidence of Roman restoration. The outcome is obscured by rival traditions. Shapur's residential Gesti Divi Saporis, the great royal inscription, presents Gordian as defeated in battle and Philip the Arab, his successor, as forced into a settlement favorable to Persia. Roman sources are more cautious, less triumphant, and often protective of imperial dignity. Gordian died in 244 AD. Philip made peace. But whether that peace was the crushing submission Shapur advertised, or a negotiated Roman withdrawal transformed by Persian propaganda into spectacle, remains contested. That uncertainty is not a distraction. It is the heart of the matter. Persian royal inscriptions were not neutral battlefield reports. They were political monuments. Yet monuments reveal strategy precisely because they show what rulers wanted the world to remember. Shapur was fighting not only over territory, but over interpretation. This was victory as theater. In the 250s AD, Shapur pressed that theater into Roman territory. Ancient traditions speak of Persian offensives against Syria and of Antioch itself, the great capital of Roman Syria, captured or sacked amid the crisis. Antioch was more than wealth and walls. It was a command center, a logistical artery, and a stage on which Roman emperors displayed Eastern mastery. To strike Antioch was to strike the image of Rome as protector of order. The Sasanian method matched this psychological war. Persian cavalry could move with speed across exposed spaces, exploiting Roman distraction, local instability, and the fractured politics of the frontier. But Shapur's campaigns were not mere raids under royal ornament. They combined mobility with siege pressure, diplomacy, intelligence, and the careful targeting of places whose fall would echo beyond their material value. A minor town could be retaken. A prestige city became a wound in imperial memory. Shapur's political intelligence lay in recognizing Rome's dependence on visible success. Roman emperors had to be seen defending the frontier, punishing insult, restoring cities, rewarding armies, and reversing humiliation. Legitimacy had to move in public. A Persian king who could force an emperor eastward, under pressure, into difficult terrain and unstable conditions, was already shaping the campaign before the final collision. Then Shapur ensured that victory would outlive rumor. At Nakshi Rostam and in related Sasanian reliefs, stone became state media. Roman emperors appear in positions of defeat, negotiation, or submission, while Shapur sits mounted and composed, the still center of an imperial drama. The inscription was not an appendix to conquest. It was conquest continued by other means. Admiration must remain disciplined by skepticism. Shapur's account is royal self-fashioning, an architecture of memory built by power for power. But that is precisely why it matters. He was not only fighting Roman armies, he was attacking Rome's imagination of itself. By the time Valerian entered the Eastern crisis, he faced more than a Persian offensive. He faced a ruler who had learned how Roman prestige could be baited, wounded, displayed, and carved into stone. Yet even the most brilliant strategy requires conditions to ripen. The next force narrowing Rome's options did not wear Persian armor. It moved through camps, supply lines, and weakened bodies, silently preparing the catastrophe at Edessa. Shapur's genius lay in turning pressure into theater. Yet the force that may have narrowed Valerian's choices most brutally did not ride beneath a Persian banner. It had no king, no treaty terms, no visible command. It moved through roads, camps, garrisons, cities, and recruitment pools, converting imperial scale into imperial vulnerability. The mid-3rd century AD was marked by the epidemic often called the Plague of Cyprian, named after Cyprian of Carthage, whose writings describe a world shaken by fever, weakness, social terror, and mass death. But Cyprian was not composing a clinical report for modern diagnosis. He was a Christian bishop interpreting catastrophe through theology and moral endurance. Modern scholars therefore treat the evidence with caution. Smallpox, measles, influenza-like disease, and viral hemorrhagic fever have all been proposed. None can be proven from the literary record alone. For strategy, however, the exact pathogen is less important than the structural fact. Epidemic disease was active across the Roman world precisely when Rome required maximum manpower, maximum mobility, and maximum confidence. Disease attacks grand strategy by attacking time. A healthy army can march before the enemy concentrates. A sick army waits. A healthy army scouts, forages, builds, pursues, withdraws, and chooses ground. A sick army consumes supplies while its radius of action shrinks. It burdens roads with wagons, attendants, wounded men, anxious officers, and delayed decisions. It turns soldiers into liabilities, commanders into crisis managers, and imperial plans into wagers. The army remains politically priceless, but operationally compromised. Too valuable to abandon, too weak to trust, too large to feed easily, and too prestigious to admit as broken. This is the dark arithmetic behind Valerian's Eastern campaign. Ancient traditions, uneven and often late, suggest that Roman forces near Edessa suffered from plague or severe illness before the final catastrophe. That claim must be handled carefully. Disasters attract explanations, and later Roman, Christian, and Byzantine writers often shaped events through moral or political agendas. Yet the report is strategically plausible because epidemic disease was not a background detail in ancient warfare. It was one of its engines. Armies were moving cities, drawing men, animals, provisions, waste, wounds, and fear into one dense organism. They gathered recruits from distant provinces and carried local sickness into imperial decision-making. For Valerian, every option began to close. Withdrawal might preserve the core of the army, but in the 3rd century AD it could look like cowardice, especially after Persian pressure had shaken Roman prestige in Syria and Mesopotamia. Advance promised restored honor, but a diseased army could stumble into exhaustion, encirclement, or panic. Remaining in place risked hunger, desertion, and further collapse. Negotiation might buy time, ransom, passage, or relief, but negotiation from weakness is never pure diplomacy. It is diplomacy conducted under a knife. Here the psychological trap becomes visible. Roman emperors were expected to appear as masters of events, but crisis punishes the performance of mastery. Valerian did not command in an empty room of theory. He acted under the gaze of soldiers, rivals, provincial elites, Persian intelligence, and centuries of Roman claims to universal authority. A retreat might save men and destroy legitimacy. A stand might preserve dignity and destroy the army. A meeting with Shapur might seem prudent and become theater. This is how systems lose optionality. Not in one dramatic instant, but through accumulation. Plague reduces mobility, logistics reduce endurance, politics reduce honesty, and prestige reduces imagination. By the time chroniclers describe the decisive encounter near Edessa, the campaign may already have been decided in the invisible ledger of sick rolls, empty storehouses, exhausted animals, and commanders unable to confess what the empire could no longer do. Ancient battles are often remembered as collisions of courage and command. Yet again and again, disease decides the campaign before the trumpet sounds. Near Edessa, Rome may have arrived not as the machinery of universal empire, but as a wounded organism still forced to look invincible. And when an army is trapped between illness, hunger, honor, and an enemy who understands political theater, the battlefield ceases to be the place where choices are made. It becomes the place where lost choices are revealed. By 260 AD, the campaign had narrowed to Edessa, a frontier city where Roman prestige, Persian ambition, disease, logistics, and political desperation converged. Edessa was not merely a military position. It belonged to the contested machinery of northern Mesopotamia, tied to roads, fortress networks, river approaches, and the fragile Roman system for holding the East together. Around such cities, empires did not fight only for ground. They fought for the right to appear inevitable. Valerian entered this arena with an army whose options may already have been collapsing. Ancient testimony suggests that plague or severe illness had weakened Roman forces. Supplies were strained. Movement had become dangerous. Retreat risked political disgrace. Advance risked annihilation. Negotiation risked exposure. Shapur I had not merely brought an army into the field. He had helped create a situation in which every Roman choice carried the smell of defeat. The precise sequence remains hidden behind the fog of ancient war. Yet one fact stands with terrible clarity. After catastrophe near Edessa, the Roman Emperor Valerian was captured alive by Shapur I of the Sasanian Empire. That sentence has to be weighed as more than an incident. Roman armies had been destroyed before. Roman generals had died before. Even emperors could fall in battle and be converted into the familiar language of sacrifice, vengeance, and succession. Death could be made useful to empire. Death could be narrated. Death could be purified. Captivity was different. A dead emperor was a tragedy. A captive emperor was evidence. The emperor was alive, and that was the disaster. Shapur's own account survives in the residential Gesti Divi Saporis, the royal inscription carved into the ideological landscape of Sasanian power. There, the King of Kings presents the victory as a cosmic reversal. Valerian, the Roman Caesar, taken with a great Roman force. Depending on translation and interpretation, the inscription can suggest that Shapur personally captured him, or that he took him prisoner as part of the broader triumph. The distinction is important for philology, but the political message is unmistakable. Rome's embodied authority had entered Persian possession. Roman traditions preserve a darker, more anxious memory. Eutropius records the shocking fact of Valerian's captivity in concise imperial summary. Aurelius Victor and later writers treat the episode as a stain upon Roman fortune. Lactantius, writing as a Christian polemicist into Mortibus Persecutorum, pushes the humiliation into moral theater, portraying Valerian's fate as divine punishment. His most lurid claims must be handled carefully. They may reveal less about the actual conditions of Persian captivity than about the later need to turn Roman shame into providential justice. So Edessa becomes not just a battlefield, but a chamber of competing narratives. Persian royal propaganda wanted a clean triumph. Roman memory wanted an explanation. Christian polemic wanted a verdict. Modern historians inherit fragments. Partisan, late, compressed, moralizing, monumental. The event is secure. The mechanism is contested. Several scenarios remain plausible. Valerian may have been defeated and encircled in open operations, leaving no military exit. A plague-stricken army may have forced him toward negotiations from a position so weak that diplomacy became surrender by another name. A diplomatic meeting may have turned into a trap, especially if Roman assumptions about imperial protocol collided with Shapur's understanding of victory as theater. Or Valerian may have accepted captivity as the price of sparing what remained of his army. The reconstruction matters, but the strategic truth cuts deeper than the mechanics. Whether seized after battle, trapped during negotiation, or surrendered under impossible pressure, Valerian crossed the invisible line between imperial actor and imperial object. He ceased to be the man directing events and became the event itself. That is why Edessa was more than a defeat. It revealed the terrifying dependence of empire on symbols. Rome claimed universal order, yet its universal ruler could be physically held by another monarch. The frontier had turned doctrine into hostage. Prestige had become geography. Strategy had become captivity. And Shapur understood that such a victory could not remain a rumor carried by frightened survivors. It had to be staged, carved, inscribed, and made permanent. The captive emperor would now become a message in stone. Persia did not allow Valerian's capture to remain a rumor carried by frightened messengers. Shapur turned it into stone, inscription, and royal theology. At Nakshi-Rostam, where older Achaemenid kings had already written themselves into the cliffs, the Sasanian monarch placed his own victory inside the deep memory of Iranian kingship. Stone became state media. Relief became verdict. The battlefield was no longer enough. Victory had to be made permanent. In the royal reliefs associated with Shapur, Rome does not appear as the master of nations. It appears as a defeated participant in a Persian drama of order. The visual language is not decoration. It is political mathematics. Shapur, mounted and sovereign, occupies the center of meaning. Around him stand or kneel Roman emperors connected with his great Western victories: Gordian III, Philip the Arab, and Valerian. The exact identification of each figure in every relief must be handled with caution. Ancient imperial art is not photography. It compresses events, rearranges chronology, and turns complicated history into one commanding image. But the intended message is unmistakable. The King of Kings had humbled the emperors of Rome. Shapur's own inscription, the residential Gesti Divis Saporis, speaks in the language of royal accounting. Gordian came against Persia and died. Philip made terms. Valerian, with a Roman army, fell into Persian hands. This was not neutral reporting. It was power describing itself to the world. Yet that is precisely why it matters. Shapur was not merely preserving a memory. He was defining the hierarchy of civilization. For Rome, the emperor was more than a field commander. He was the living seal of imperial legitimacy, the man through whom victory, divine favor, law, and military obedience were supposed to flow. To capture such a man alive was to invert the Roman imagination. Provinces could rebel, legions could be destroyed, cities could fall. But here, the symbolic center of Roman order had been transferred into the possession of a rival universal monarchy. The insult was metaphysical before it was diplomatic. Ancient states fought for cities, tribute, captives, roads, and fortresses. But beneath all of that, they fought for the right to define reality. Rome had mastered this for centuries through triumphal processions, coin portraits, arches, titles, and histories written near the heat of power. Shapur answered in the imperial language of Iran: cliffs, inscriptions, royal images, and the cosmic dignity of the King of Kings. Victory as theater was not ornament after battle. It was strategy after battle. Valerian's fate belongs to the darker chamber of hostile memory. Later Roman and Christian traditions claimed that Shapur humiliated him savagely. Lactantius, writing in De Mortibus Persecutorum as a Christian author with a moral and polemical purpose, presents Valerian's suffering as divine punishment for persecution. His account includes the famous story that the captive emperor was used as a human footstool when Shapur mounted his horse. Other later traditions go further, claiming that Valerian was skinned after death and his skin preserved as a trophy. These stories are memorable, but memory is not proof. They reveal what later writers wanted Valerian's end to mean, not necessarily what happened in Persia. The secure fact is colder and more devastating. Valerian entered Persian captivity and never returned to rule. Whether his final years were theatrical torment, dignified confinement, or some harsher condition between the two, Rome could not recover him. That absence became its own political wound. The captured army mattered as well. Shapur's inscription boasts of large numbers of prisoners taken from Roman territory, and later traditions connect Roman captives with labor, settlement, and construction inside the Sasanian realm. Scholars have sometimes associated deported Roman artisans, engineers, and soldiers with projects in southwestern Iran, including urban and hydraulic works, though the details remain debated. Still, the strategic pattern is clear. Captives were not only trophies, they were manpower. Rome's military disaster could be converted into Persian capacity. That was the cold genius of the aftermath. Shapur transformed a captured emperor into a political text, captured soldiers into usable resources, and a frontier catastrophe into an enduring claim about world order. The war had moved from Edessa to memory. And while Persia carved its triumph into stone, the news traveled west into an empire forced to confront an unbearable question. What remained of Roman authority when Rome could not protect the man who embodied it? While Shapur turned victory into stone, the Roman world had to receive it as a political fact. And in an empire held together by soldiers, taxes, roads, oaths, and rumor, news could move with the force of an invading army. Gallienus still ruled in the west. Rome had not been decapitated in the formal sense. Another emperor remained. But 3rd century legitimacy was never merely a title recorded in Senate memory. It was a living bargain between ruler and army, province and center, fear and protection. Valerian's capture did not simply remove a commander from the Eastern theater. It proved that the imperial office itself could be seized, transported, and humiliated by a foreign king. That wound open space for the oldest law of crisis politics. When the center cannot protect, the periphery begins to improvise. In the east, the vacuum drew forward Macrianus Major, a powerful figure connected to Valerian's financial and military apparatus. The later Roman tradition, including material preserved through difficult sources such as the Historia Augusta, must be handled carefully. Personalities often appear more clearly than the machinery that elevated them. Yet the pattern is unmistakable. Macrianus did not claim the purple for himself, perhaps because of age, physical limitation, or political calculation. Instead, his sons, Macrianus Minor and Quietus, were raised as imperial claimants. This was not just vanity dressed in imperial color. It was a regional command structure trying to answer a brutal administrative question. If Gallienus was far away, absorbed by Western emergencies, and unable to rescue the East immediately, who would pay the troops, direct defense, negotiate loyalty, and command obedience? In Roman law, usurpation was treason. In the lived reality of a frightened frontier, it could look like emergency government. Near this turbulence stands Ballista, also called Callistus in some sources, another figure partly obscured by late and partisan testimony. He is associated with resistance against Persian operations after Edessa, and some traditions credit him with effective action against Shapur's forces. The details cannot be treated as clean battlefield reporting. But his significance is larger than the anecdotes. Rome was not simply lying stunned on the floor of history. Officers, financiers, city elites, and regional strongmen were scrambling to keep the Eastern system alive. Then from Palmyra, that wealthy hinge between the Roman Mediterranean and the caravan worlds of the East, rose Odenathus. Palmyra was not yet Rome's enemy. That later drama belonged to Zenobia and a changed political landscape. In this moment, Palmyra was a semi-autonomous partner within the Roman order, rich in local loyalty, mobile power, desert intelligence, and commercial reach. Odenathus understood the new arithmetic. If Rome could no longer guarantee security alone, Palmyra could become the shield. And by becoming the shield, it could become almost sovereign. His campaigns helped check Persian power and restore Roman influence in parts of the East. But every success carried a dangerous double meaning. For Gallienus, Odenathus was useful, even indispensable. For the provinces, he proved that rescue might come not from the distant imperial center, but from a nearer protector with horses, money, intelligence, and speed. The same logic was unfolding in the West. In 260 AD, Postumus established what modern historians call the Gallic Empire, a breakaway regime in Gaul, Britain, and parts of Spain. The subtlety is crucial. It did not necessarily present itself as anti-Roman in culture. It claimed to defend Roman order when the central emperor could not. It minted coins, guarded frontiers, commanded armies, and spoke in the language of legitimacy while refusing obedience to Gallienus. The imperial map now fractured into zones of practical authority. Gallienus holding the central claim, Postumus guarding the west, Macrianus and his sons grasping for eastern legitimacy, Palmyra rising as the indispensable shield of Syria and Mesopotamia. Rome had not ceased to exist, but its monopoly on security had cracked. That was the deeper shockwave of Valerian's capture. One defeat did not create every fracture, but it accelerated a revelation decades in the making. Imperial power was only as real as its ability to arrive in time. When Rome could not be everywhere, provinces looked to those who were already there. So Edessa became more than a Persian triumph. It became a referendum on distance, trust, and survival. Rome would not die from this wound, but every enemy, every ally, and every ambitious commander now recalculated what imperial weakness meant and what could be built in the space it left behind. The astonishing fact is not that Rome suffered catastrophe. The astonishing fact is that Rome did not die. A living emperor had passed into enemy hands. The eastern provinces had been shaken. Palmyra had risen from ally and caravan city into a regional power broker. In the west, Postumus and the Gallic Empire had carved out a rival imperial sphere. By the theatrical logic of ancient sovereignty, Rome should have collapsed beneath the weight of its own humiliation. But empires are not made of ceremony alone. They are roads, taxes, arsenals, officer corps, legal habits, provincial bargains, and the stubborn memory of order. Valerian's capture shattered the myth of Roman invulnerability, but it did not erase the machinery of Roman survival. The state bled, contracted, improvised, and slowly learned. Gallienus, ruling after his father's disappearance, inherited a throne that had become less a seat of majesty than a command post inside a storm. Ancient writers often judged him harshly, as they tended to judge emperors who presided over disaster. Later moralists preferred simple explanations. A weak ruler, a cursed age, a punishment from heaven or fate. Modern historians are more cautious. The crisis was not a normal empire badly governed. It was an abnormal emergency in which every solution created another danger. Under Gallienus, the Roman military system began to bend toward a different future. Greater emphasis seems to have fallen on mobile forces, including cavalry formations and faster field responses capable of moving toward crises rather than waiting behind the old theater of fixed frontier confidence. Scholars still debate how systematic these reforms truly were, and the evidence does not permit a neat blueprint. But the strategic direction is clear. Rome needed speed. It needed reserves. It needed commanders able to react to reality, not to imperial mythology. Rome did not survive because it was invincible. It survived because it could become something else. That is the hinge of the 3rd century story. Humiliation did not automatically destroy the empire. It exposed which parts of the system could still learn. A state that mistakes embarrassment for extinction surrenders too early. A state that denies embarrassment learns too late. Rome did both at times. Yet through the agony after Edessa, it discovered the brutal discipline of adaptation. Aurelian would later give that adaptation a sword. In the 270s AD, he reconquered Palmyra, defeated the Gallic Empire, and restored imperial unity with a violence and efficiency that earned him the title Restitutor Orbis, Restorer of the World. The title was propaganda, but not empty propaganda. Unity had not survived by inertia. It had to be rebuilt through campaigns, sieges, punishments, bargains, and the reassertion of central power over provinces that had learned to survive without waiting for Rome. Further down that road stood Diocletian. Edessa did not mechanically produce his reforms. History is rarely that obedient. But the crisis age revealed the questions Diocletian would answer with severity. How could one emperor be everywhere? How could frontiers be defended without turning every successful general into a usurper? How could taxation, recruitment, command, and legitimacy be reorganized so the empire no longer depended on one sacred body riding from emergency to emergency? Diocletian's answer was structural. Formalized collegial rule, administrative division, stronger bureaucracy, militarized government, and an imperial architecture that admitted what older mythology resisted. The empire was too vast, too pressured, and too complex to be governed, as if Augustus still stood alone at the center of a calm world. Persia preserved Valerian's capture as royal glory. Shapur's stone proclaimed hierarchy. King of kings above Roman emperor, Iranian triumph above Roman arrogance. Rome absorbed the lesson differently, not in one inscription, not in one confession, but through wounds, reforms, and the slow surrender of old assumptions. Persia turned victory into memory. Rome turned humiliation eventually into method. And so the prisoner of Edessa becomes more than a defeated emperor. He becomes evidence of a law that power hates to acknowledge. When institutions are forced to serve prestige rather than reality, they begin constructing their own prison. The final reflection must therefore move beyond the mechanics of Valerian's capture and toward the deeper human danger behind it. Pride, denial, reputation, and the terrible cost of refusing to see that the world has changed. After the reforms, the reconquests, the improvised divisions of power, and the long Roman struggle to become something harder than the old principate had been, the eye returns to the image that began the rupture. Valerian, Emperor of Rome, alive in Persian hands. The details of his captivity remain shadowed. Lactantius gave the later Christian world a vision of grotesque humiliation, but Lactantius wrote as a polemicist, not as a neutral witness. Other Roman summaries are briefer, colder, almost embarrassed by the fact they preserve. Shapur's own inscription, carved into the royal memory of Sasanian Iran, speaks in the language of triumph, hierarchy, and divine favor. The ornaments of the story remain disputed. The central fact does not. In 260 AD, the man who embodied Roman authority became the prisoner of Rome's great eastern rival. That was the verdict of Edessa. Not that Rome was finished. Not that Persia had conquered the Mediterranean world. Not that one catastrophe erased centuries of Roman power. The verdict was more severe and more useful. Empires are most endangered when their symbols demand actions their systems can no longer support. Valerian had to appear in the east because an emperor absent from danger looked diminished. He had to answer Persia because imperial prestige could not tolerate unanswered humiliation. He had to hold the frontier because armies, cities, provincial elites, and the mythology of Rome all required visible mastery. But the machinery beneath the symbol was cracking under plague, usurpation, fiscal strain, divided command, and too many frontiers demanding imperial presence at the same time. The purple promised universality. The map delivered overextension. Here lies the stubborn human pattern. Leaders confuse status with capacity. Institutions punish the voice that admits exhaustion. Societies prefer the theater of control because theater is emotionally cheaper than reform. Titles, ceremonies, slogans, and inherited prestige can make a system look coherent long after its options have narrowed. Then reality stages its coup. Shapur understood the deeper battlefield. His triumph mattered not simply because a Roman army was broken, but because Rome's imagination was attacked. The emperor was not merely defeated, he was reclassified. In the Sasanian vision, proclaimed in inscription and monumental art, the Roman world had been forced beneath the gaze of the King of Kings. This was victory as theater, and theater as geopolitics. Yet Rome's survival carries the counter-verdict. Institutions can sometimes learn after symbolic death. Rome absorbed the shame slowly, unevenly, and often brutally. It fragmented, improvised, delegated, militarized, and eventually refashioned the imperial office itself. The myth of effortless supremacy died. The state, altered and scarred, endured. The resonance is restrained, but unmistakable. Great powers in every age face the temptation to mistake reputation for strategy, to confuse the need to appear decisive with the ability to achieve decision. Prestige is not armor. A system can remain powerful in every visible way while quietly losing the capacity to support its own promises. The final question is not simply whether Valerian was foolish, or whether Shapur was brilliant. It is whether any civilization can recognize the moment when its symbols have begun issuing orders that reality will not obey. Valerian was not merely a prisoner of Persia. He was a prisoner of the imperial assumptions that brought him there. Continue the journey through Archives of Humanity by selecting the video appearing on the end screen now, and keep the archive open a little longer. Subscribe for more grand strategic history, where battles are treated not as isolated events, but as revelations of power, legitimacy, and human nature. If this work deserves a place in the long memory, support the archive through membership or patronage. And in the comments, answer this directly. Which force mattered more at Edessa, Shapur's strategy, or Rome's overextension?